Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Coin Republic podcast. My name is Shorabacharya. Today we have Q. What is Q? Q is a novel blockchain that combines the benefits of a public, open, and decentralized ledger with the transparency and predictability of enforceable private contracts. It is based on a unique governance systems which has the Q constitution at its core. We're going to take a deep dive into it in this podcast as well. Q thereby enables a great variety of real life use cases. We're going to ask some of those use cases as well on this podcast. Their desire is to create a decentralization platform that is compatible with scalability and dependability. To learn about Q, you can go to their website, q.org. But I have the perfect person to talk about this thing. I have Mr. Martin Smith. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly? All right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very common German name, so don't try Googling me, Martin Schmidt. There are a bunch of people with that name,
Okay.
but absolutely correct.
So you're one of the co-founders of Q Protocol. If I may ask your role in this venture.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm one of the initiators of the protocol. So together with two other people, we started bouncing back and forth first concepts and ideas around 2018. In the meantime, have assembled a team that has built Q, the platform. We launched mainnet in March 2022. So mainnet is live. The blockchain is live. Protocol is live. Currently growing, gaining traction, onboarding other protocols that use Q's governance features, but also it's a blockchain on its own, fully functional.
Okay. Uh, could you tell me what consensus mechanism are you guys operating in at the moment? If it is proof of work, proof of stake, proof of history, which one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's proof of stake, or to be more precise, delegated proof of stake.
Mhm.
So there are inbuilt delegation functionality, which I guess is a topical issue right now with what's being discussed in the Ethereum community. Think there's been a blog post by Vitalik where he asked the question whether in protocol delegation should be on the roadmap for Ethereum even. So um, that's the way that Q is set up already. So there are mostly professional validators, but everyone with one queue or even less, even a fraction of a queue can delegate within the protocol.
Right. You mentioned that Q protocol goes beyond code is law. Could you elaborate on how it achieves this and what implications it has for decentralized governance in particular?
Yeah, sure. So the basic insight or thesis behind this concept, that we call beyond code is law, is that what you can do with smart contracts is fantastic. It's great. It's a great innovation. But at the same time, it's very limiting because a lot of the decisions that we take on a day-to-day basis are not fully codable because they're not 100% predictable. There is an economic theory behind it. It's called the theory of incomplete contracts. Someone received the Nobel Prize for that a few years ago. It basically tells you that as soon as things get a little bit more complex, a little bit more interesting, you have judgment, you have intent, and you have things that need interpretation and that you cannot predict or code in advance. And this is kind of what we've been trying to add to the Web3 space with Q. So while we think the concept of code as law is extremely valuable, it's great. Wherever you could code things in immutable smart contracts, you should. But there is always this aspect of decisions that go beyond that. And this is what Q intends to solve for. So, in a fully decentralized way. And why is that important to do it in a decentralized way? If you don't, it means you're falling back on centralized systems. either you have founders, you have core teams with admin keys, multi-sigs that control the protocol effectively, but then you kind of also giving up on the whole point of decentralization at the same time. So we're trying to combine both elements within a decentralized framework. I mean, do code what you can go code via smart contracts. Immutability is great, but where it hits its limits, this is where Q comes in.
Fantastic. Now, I believe that you guys are EVM compatible as well, right? So,
Yes.
you that which means you guys are connected to the Ethereum ecosystem. Now, how does this integration benefit users and developers? For those who, ventures who are not EVM compatible, do you have an edge against them?
Well, so as you said, Q, the blockchain is fully EVM compatible. So all tooling that you know from the Ethereum ecosystem or smart contracts, you can easily deploy on Q as well. There is a bridge to the Ethereum mainnet as well that's fully functional and working. Um, and let me maybe take a step back and talk about a little bit the concept of how other protocols can benefit from Q. So up until very recently, the Q governance framework or governance architecture was used primarily to govern the protocol itself, the core protocol. So since mainnet launch, the governance features have been live and have been used. Now, recently, what's happened is that we've started integrating other applications and protocols into Q, meaning that we're looking for a path for them to use those governance features as well. And this is a process that's currently ongoing. So it's kind of the phase two, if you will, of protocol development. But in the first step, that is only possible for protocols that build on the Q blockchain. Now, in the future, the vision is that this will also be possible for protocols in other ecosystems on other blockchains, layer ones, layer twos. Initially, obviously, integrating with other EVM compatible applications is easier, but ultimately, the vision is to also integrate non EVM chains or applications that live on non EVM chains. Now, obviously, there is more technical complexity to that, but the whole area of bridges, interchain, cross-chain communication is evolving rapidly. So in that sense, time is on our side.
Fantastic. Could you provide some examples of real world use cases or projects that have leveraged the Q protocol's governance framework effectively? A couple of case studies.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the protocol itself. So there is, in a proof of stake network, typically you have a concept of slashing. So validators that don't comply with the rules are slashed, meaning that they lose some of the stake which they've submitted or which they've committed to securing the network. Now, in Ethereum and other networks that are working purely on a code is law basis, that is limited to slashing offenses that you can detect automatically. Um, when it comes to other types of offenses that you cannot easily detect automatically or in a purely technical way, it becomes much more difficult. So censorship is one example. And that discussion, I think, became relevant last year at the latest with the OFAC sanctions in the US and the question within the Ethereum community, what do we do if we find that the network is threatened by validators that censor transactions? And that resulted in a discussion around social slashing, meaning that the community would need to decide basically on an ad hoc basis of forking out or slashing validators that don't comply with what the community perceives or decides to be the rules that are applied. Now, Q offers a different solution to that, constitutional slashing, basically. So you have the rules that are clearly defined, they're written down in the constitution. Um, And there is a mechanism with a second layer of nodes that can implement slashing decisions, even for slashing offenses that are not detected or cannot be detected automatically purely in a technical way. So, and this has been done. We've had the first case of validated this has been slashed recently. Luckily, just a small offense, nothing major. Nevertheless, it kind of shows that the system is working, that it can be done. So this is on the protocol, core protocol itself. Secondly, and I'll speed things up a little bit. There are currently protocols that are integrating, and maybe just one example uh, to make it a bit clearer is a liquid staking provider that's building on Q, also active on other networks, and there the question is around smart contract upgrades. So the liquid staking protocol is based on a set of smart contracts that are not immutable. They can be upgraded. Currently, that's done via admin keys, as is the case with many protocols. Nevertheless, the community does desire to have certain immutable rules that will survive any smart contract upgrade. And those are the kind of things that you can then lay down in your own rule set. You can call it constitution or whatever you want. And that rule set can then be enforced via the Q governance, meaning that any smart contract upgrade would need to be approved or it could be vetoed via the Q governance framework, ensuring that certain very basic fundamental rules will survive smart contract upgrades, which otherwise would be hard to detect for the community or hard to enforce.
Okay. Let's talk about security. What cryptographic techniques or technologies are employed in the Q protocol to ensure privacy and security of private contracts?
Yeah, so basically, in terms of cryptographic techniques, it's the same as you have in the Ethereum core protocols. So, basically, technically, the Q client is a fork of the Geth client. So, in terms of cryptography, there is actually nothing novel or nothing special in the Q protocol. So, all of the cryptography is tried and tested. There are no specific privacy features currently in the Q protocol. So there are private contracts, but in the sense that they are private between the parties that conclude them. So not necessarily private in the context of secret contracts or confidential contracts. Having said that, of course, any privacy protocol um, that is on other Ethereum or EVM compatible chains could easily be deployed on Q as well.
Right. You guys identify yourself as layer one, correct? Layer one blockchain, is it?
That is correct. Q technically is a layer one blockchain.
Okay.
Having said that, we don't consider Q to be competing with other layer ones for block space. So really, the unique feature that Q offers compared to other layer ones or even applications layer twos are the governance features. And the reason it's built out as a layer one is to really have a technical foundation that enables those governance features. So being a layer one means that you have a higher level of economic security behind it. It's easier to share governance security because everything is connected at the end of the day to Q's native asset, Q token, and therefore provides the highest level of economic security for the governance features. Having said that, I think we're pretty technology agnostic. So if tomorrow another technology came along where we would think that this serves the purpose of providing those governance features better, at least speaking for myself, I wouldn't mind changing things, or actually to be more precise, would be willing to make a proposal that would then um, if the community so decides, be adopted by Q the protocol. So also protocol changes, even very fundamental changes like using different technology on Q are all subject to the Q governance framework itself. So there's a clear path of how technical changes are implemented.
So, in terms of scalability, how do you guys address potential issues, especially with growing adoption and usages? And in that context, if you could shed some light on your layer two plans.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, right now there are no concrete layer two plans because, as I said, we're not considering Q to be competing for block space or competing on metrics like transaction throughput, transaction speed.
Governance.
So really, we're focusing on that governance feature. Having said that, being EVM compatible would make it very easy for another L2 that's already living on another
Oh,
EVM compatible chain to be deployed on Q as well. And by the way, also interestingly, uh, we are in touch with people from other layer twos, which are interested in using Q's governance features as well. So also there is a connection. I mean, I guess we are believers in a multi-chain world, and that would encompass L2s as well as L1s.
mm. So, how can developers and projects effectively leverage the checks and balances within the Q protocol for their own governance framework? And are there any notable case studies on that context? Can you name, drop some names again in that context?
Yeah. So there are different levels of integration. I mean, you can just build fully permissionlessly on Q as you can on any other public permissionless blockchain. And by doing that, you automatically benefit from some features like the dispute resolution process that's ingrained in the Q protocol. Now, um, if you want to integrate deeper, as in the case study I just mentioned with the liquid staking provider, um, then currently that still takes some bespoke work, so to speak. So it's working together with projects, and the first step is really figuring out what it is exactly that they need in terms of governance protection. So, as in the case of a liquid staking provider, it could be ingraining certain non codable elements, that will survive smart contract upgrades. Another case study currently is working with DAO called HerDAO, which is promoting women in Web3. They're building their community on Q, and so you could have your own DAO constitution and have the features or elements of the DAO constitution be protected by the Q governance framework. So you can kind of think of it as, a bit like a decentralized digital jurisdiction, where, let's say you have a company in the centralized world, you have your own bylaws, you set your own rules, but then they are protected by the legal system. As an analogy, on Q, you could have certain rules that you decide for as a community protected by the Q governance system.
Okay. You mentioned disputes. Let's break that down a little bit more. How are disputes resolved in the Q protocol? Could you detail the mechanism and any cryptographic methods you use in that process?
Yeah. So basis for everything that happens on Q is the constitution, and the methods for resolving disputes is described in there. So you have a very clear framework that you're working on. So it enables people to gain certainty of what is the process in case of disputes for those elements that are integrated with the Q governance framework. And essentially, the dispute resolution process is based on private arbitration, which is tried and tested concept. It's applied regularly in the corporate world. If companies do business cross-border internationally, they regularly use private arbitration, so it works well. We have within the Q constitution currently the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce's private court of arbitration, as the default arbitration arbitration court, but currently also implementing other options. And the way it works that essentially you go through the private arbitration process, but then the implementation on chain of the arbitral award or the ruling that comes out of that is implemented by what we call root nodes. So root nodes are full nodes within the queue system that, in contrast to validator nodes, are not involved in block production or validating transactions, but they have a governance function. So they are executing, for example, arbitral awards that come out of that dispute resolution process, out of the arbitration court. So, if the ruling is that funds needs to be transferred from an escrow account from A to B, that would be taken care of by those root nodes. So there is a link, if you will, between the on-chain world and the off-chain world that enables us to tap into existing private arbitration options in the quote-unquote real world.
Fair enough. Could you describe the on-chain and off-chain architecture the Q protocol has in particular, and how these components work together to enforce rules?
Yeah. There is a bit of legal engineering behind the system. So in a first instance, Q obviously being a layer one protocol, an on-chain protocol, things happen on chain, but are always tied to the Q constitution. So let's take the example of slashing. If there is a slashable offense, it needs to be highlighted by one participant in queue, can be any queue token holder, and then is brought to a vote by the root nodes, which will vote on that not arbitrarily, but according to the rules that are laid down in the queue constitution. Now, let's say there is a risk, obviously, that the root nodes don't do their job properly or collude or just make a wrong decision for whatever reason, and that can be challenged by the potentially offending validator node. So the offending validator node would have the option to bring that case in front of a private arbitration court. Now, and that is basically where the on-chain off-chain link is, the first one. So you'd have on-chain information, but the validator would actually need to go to the arbitration court in the off-chain world, bring that case. And the mechanic there is that one root node will be the counterpart to that case, and be responsible also for participating in that arbitration case. And then, depending on the ruling, will need to communicate that information in the on-chain to the on-chain world again. And as I said, there is a bunch of legal engineering coupled with I guess crypto economic engineering to ensure that the rules and incentives are such that the system works. So that includes things like the root node that steps out and actually volunteers, so to speak, to be a counterparty in the arbitration case, gets a reward for that. But at the same time, also root nodes need to submit stake that is slashable in case they make a mistake or not. I mean, basically they commit an offense that's slashable according to the rules. So plus, as I said, there is also some legal engineering in the quote unquote real world, in the sense that root nodes do need to disclose their identity. They need to be located in a jurisdictions where arbitral awards from private arbitration courts can be enforced. So here you have a connection also to quote unquote real world enforcement, law enforcement.
Right, the combination of both always works. Final question: where you guys are more active? Discord, Twitter Spaces. Where could they be a part of your live discussions more often?
There is a community Discord where a lot of the discussions happen. There is a Twitter account. It's at QBlockchain, and I think those are the main places. So Twitter, Discord. Also, there is a Telegram community. Uh, those are the main places.
Fantastic. Definitely. We're definitely going to cover you guys in the future as well. Let's stay in touch and see where it goes. All the best to you guys.